Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Friday night on this program, as we awaited the verdict in the trial of George Zimmerman for the killing of Trayvon Martin, my guest, Jelani Cobb of the University of Connecticut, said something that stuck with me and haunted me throughout the weekend. He said in cases like this, he didn't think black people in America expect justice, that they've just been here too many times before. And tonight, in the wake of a not guilty verdict, we'll spend the hour examining how we got to this place and where we go from here. We begin in Sanford, Florida, 505 days ago.
New tonight, a deadly shooting in Sanford. Police have the gun. They've got the shooter, but they have not arrested him. And as Fox 35's Keith Landry tells us, the dead man's grieving family wants to know why not.
Was that a friend of yours? That's my son. Who was your son?
This afternoon, we met Tracy Martin at the crime scene. He says his 17-year-old son, Trayvon Martin, was shot to death.
He walked out the house to go to the store. He was going to the store.
The guy on the bottom, who I believe had a red sweater on, was yelling to me, "Help, help." I told him to stop, and I was calling 911.
The family of 17-year-old Trayvon Martin is asking the state attorney's office, attorney general, and Sanford police to prosecute the Miami teenager's killer.
In this case, Mr. Zimmerman has made the statement of self-defense. Until we can establish probable cause to dispute that, we don't have the grounds to arrest him.
Outraged residents have asked the Sanford Police Department to show accountability.
If this young man would have shot this man, would he have been arrested? He definitely would have been arrested.
My heart hurts for my son. Trayvon is my son. Trayvon is your son.
Justice equals peace. Yes. Which means no justice, no peace.
Crowds gather in Florida, and for that matter, in cities and towns across the country, brought together in their outrage over the killing of an unarmed teenager in Florida.
Hundreds of students walked out of more than a dozen schools in Trayvon Martin's hometown of Miami.
From 30th Street Station, peaceful protesters marched about 15 blocks, hoping their cries for justice reach hundreds of miles away in Sanford, Florida.
Massive support continues to spread across the country. From Atlanta to New York and Chicago, thousands donned hoodies in church in solidarity with Trayvon Martin.
The Miami Heat were in town Friday night, sure to beat the Pistons, but also used the game to make a statement about how they feel about a team from their area, Trayvon Martin.
A lot of us are fathers, or a lot of us have young boys. And,
you know, if our voice can help in any kind of way, then that's what we're willing to do.
When I think about this boy, I think about my own kids. And I think every parent in America should be able to understand why it is absolutely imperative that we investigate every aspect of this.
And the online groundswell continues to build. 1.2 million people have signed the Martin family's internet petition demanding Zimmerman's arrest.
The special prosecutor has charged George Zimmerman with second-degree murder. George Zimmerman, 28 years old, was taken into custody.
Today, we filed an information charging George Zimmerman with murder in the second degree. A capias has been issued for his arrest.
Do you feel you wouldn't be here for this interview if you didn't have that gun?
No, sir.
You feel you would not be here?
I feel that it was all God's plan, and for me to second guess it or judge it.
On April 11th, 2012, Special Prosecutor Angela Corey filed a charge of murder in the second degree against George Zimmerman. He pleaded not guilty, claiming self-defense. More than a year later, after 12 days of testimony and 2 days of deliberation, the jury reached its verdict.
We're going to go to Craig Melvin right now. Craig, what do you got?
We have a verdict, Chris Jansen. The PIO for the courthouse has just indicated that a verdict has been reached in the murder trial of George Zimmerman.
In the Circuit Court of the 18th Judicial Circuit in and for Seminole County, Florida, State of Florida versus George Zimmerman. Verdict, we the jury find George Zimmerman not guilty. So say we all foreperson.
To the living we owe respect. To the dead we owe the truth. We have been respectful to the living. We have done our best to assure due process to all involved. And we believe that we brought out the truth on behalf of Trayvon Martin.
I think that the evidence supported that George Zimmerman did nothing wrong and that he was battered and beaten by a
a 17-year-old who, for whatever reason, and we won't know, thought that he had to lash out and attack violently.
To everybody that put their hoodies up, and to everybody who said, "I am Trayvon," his family expressed their heartfelt gratitude for helping them these past 17 months.
So far, the paranoid predictions of mass race riots have not come true. But that does not mean there is not fury and anger. There have been peaceful demonstrations and prayer services across the country, and the anger and deep disappointment has as much to do with the context of this verdict as the verdict itself. A perception that in America, justice is not blind. There are now questions of a possible civil trial and a continuing Justice Department investigation, as well as some astounding post-verdict remarks by Zimmerman's defense attorneys about the prosecution of George Zimmerman being a disgrace. We'll also look at why the Stand Your Ground law was somehow not available to Marissa Alexander, a 31-year-old black woman who felt threatened by an estranged husband in the same state and under the jurisdiction of the same state attorney, Angela Corey, who oversaw the Zimmerman prosecution. We will get to all of that. But first, we are all still processing what this verdict says about equal justice under law. Joining me on satellite is Melissa Harris Perry, host of the eponymous show that airs right here on MSNBC on Saturday and Sunday mornings at 10 a.m. And joining me here at the table is MSNBC political analyst Michael Eric Dyson, professor of sociology at Georgetown University, and Maya Wiley, civil rights attorney and founder and president of the Center for Social Inclusion, a social justice nonprofit. And Melissa, I want to begin with you. You were incredibly compelling and eloquent and emotional in what you said on Saturday night and on Sunday. How are you feeling about the fallout from the verdict now today on Monday?
Well, you know, Chris, I think you and I have talked before when you got initially had your weekend show about a year before I got the MHP show, and sort of how odd it felt as people who weren't initially journalists to suddenly have a TV show in this way. And I have to say this weekend was maybe one of the first times when I felt really not up to the task, that a lot of the personal rawness of the emotional experience was potentially overcoming anything that I had to say. And I don't say that because anybody should have any sort of feelings for me about it, but rather that I think that I'm not completely an outlier in that, and that many of us are going through multiple stages of grief and fury and resignation, and also trying to analyze it. It's not as though we believe that any verdict, of course, would bring back young Trayvon. I mean, that was never on the table as a possibility. But there is this sense of alienation from the state that compounds the sense of agony in this case.
Do you feel that, Michael? I think that's a fascinating way of putting it, just alienation from the state, that somehow we're not playing by the same rules, we're not covered by the same system, that we have been pushed outside the tent by this verdict.
Absolutely right. And Melissa is absolutely right there. Verdict, truth. But it's not our truth. And the alienation from the state, especially ironic in light of the fact that the ostensible or putative head of that state is a black man, and the head of the justice system is another black man. And yet we know now that that symbolic representation of our enormous progress, undeniable, is also juxtaposed to another undeniable reality, that the system, Robin Kelly makes this argument in his brilliant piece in Counterpunch. He said, it's not that the system failed us. He said the system worked just as it's supposed to work, because the system has been rigged against us from the very beginning. We've never been able to stand our ground because the system has protected white peoplehood, white property, and white privilege. And that's the bottom line.
Maya.
I was a little undone by your opening clips. I thought I had gotten to a point where the raw emotion of that, seeing Sabrina say, "This is my son, this is your son," is very much still present. What I think is most important, which I agree with both Melissa and Michael, the justice system is not a just system. And one of the most damaging to the fabric of the nation and damaging to the reform is that we now have people saying Trayvon Martin was convicted. Right. Not George Zimmerman was acquitted because there was not sufficient proof, but that Trayvon Martin was convicted of a crime.
Right. There was this incredible, I have to say that I have actually tried very hard throughout the trial to kind of give the defense the benefit of the doubt, just as human beings, because they are, I have a lot of respect for defense attorneys, and it's a hard job, and they are doing their constitutional duty to defend their client and with as much zeal and vigor as they can. I thought the post-verdict press conference was an abomination, was just an absolute, because you don't have to do that. There's nothing you have to do about that press conference. And I want to play this one clip because this was the one that really made me angry. This is Don West and Mark O'Mara. Take a look.
I think the prosecution of George Zimmerman was disgraceful. As happy as I am for George Zimmerman, I'm thrilled that this jury kept this tragedy from becoming a travesty.
Well, I think that the things would have been different if George Zimmerman was black for this reason. He never would have been charged with a crime.
Yeah, Melissa, did that scan to you?
Well, so what I appreciate about what you just said is something that I think we have to keep in mind here that is critical going forward. And that is, that's right. George Zimmerman was absolutely constitutionally had the right to a vigorous defense. These defense attorneys put on a vigorous defense. I think that there's a lot of reasons to ask about how vigorous the prosecution was. That said, what we are now looking at is sort of the social and political and economic construction that comes around this case. And that's the thing that's bigger than the actual trial itself.
Someone said this thing on Twitter. I think it was a guy named Jim Henley, who I really like and follow. And he said, I have one thought that I hope that George Zimmerman goes home tonight and thinks about what he did and what happened, but there is this world awaiting him that wants to embrace him as a hero. There's an entire universe to whom he has become.
He's been made an icon. I ran into my hotel and that evening ran into George Zimmerman's best friend. We had a vigorous, non-hostile conversation for 20 minutes. And I said to him, "Sir, your friend just murdered an unarmed young man." He said, "But there was no probable cause for him to be arrested." I said, "We're not only speaking different languages, we're living in different universes. There is a world awaiting George Zimmerman that will support him economically, that will make him an icon, and he has become a kind of patron saint of the right wing in a very serious way."
And seeing the reaction to the verdict from this crazy, way the verdict was processed through the American lens of both racial polarization and partisan polarization, was just like they
converge.
On one hand, for the defense attorneys to say this was not about race, and then on the other hand to come out and say if George Zimmerman was a black man who wouldn't be charged, is to say we're actually trying to say it is about race and we're trying to flip the script.
And the other thing that I found so fascinating is this conservative obsession with Zimmerman's race, the fact that he is that he is of Peruvian extraction, I believe, on his mother's side, that he is not white. And the thing I keep saying is it is about Trayvon Martin's race, this case. I mean, when Sean Bell was shot by New York cops, some of which who happened to be African American, the people that I know, the activists in New York, weren't like, well, it's okay because some of the cops were black, right? It's about this.
Chris, this is such an important point. I've been hearing in the days since, repeatedly this language of, well, we're all racist in some ways, and I want to be really clear. Sure, we are, but we're all racist against African Americans. It's not that we're all racist and black folks are racist against whites, and it's that there is a constant group for whom there is this sense of criminality, a sense of taking, being takers, not makers, and that is shared even among often members of that group because of how our media operates and because of how a deep history of segregation and the continuing realities of that segregation operate to reinforce those beliefs about blackness and black bodies.
Melissa, I want you to stick around. We're going to bring Congressman Hakeem Jeffries to talk a little bit about what might be done at the federal level going forward right after we take this break.